Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 262. Excellent. Well, we have a wonderful guest with us today and a woman who is inspiring me to definitely, I'm very excited to have you here because what Carrie Forrest does is right up my alley. Her passion in life is to inspire women to take control of their health with a focus on holistic living, and particularly with how they can improve their health by getting into the kitchen and eating in a way that fuels their body and that can actually heal or reverse disease or put you in remission. Now, Carrie, what I was so inspired by is that you have used diet to be able to no longer have polycystic ovarian syndrome, autoimmune disease, eating disorder, panic attacks, IBS, chronic migraines, and depression. And you also are a survivor of thyroid cancer since 2012. I know everyone is now on the edge of their seat after hearing all the things that you've overcome and that you have improved and maintained your health with food. And we had a really fun chat before we hit record because I know you were a little concerned since I've been excited about more of a plant-based diet, and you were a little concerned that I wouldn't like your style, but I actually really like your style because you're into helping people find foods that are healing and not really give in to any one diet dogma. So, Carrie, I know this is going to be a lot of fun having you share everything today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashley. I am equally inspired by you and all of the amazing interviews you've done, and it's truly an honor to be on your podcast today.
Absolutely. Now, your website is cleaneatingkitchen.com. Is that correct?
That's right.
And you also have a podcast. We've had listeners ask in the Facebook group, what other health podcasts are out there that I could learn from? And so this is one of them. Clean Eating for Women is also available on iTunes. And you love to focus on the different things. I see probiotics and polycystic ovarian syndrome and CBD oils and paleo diet and eating disorders, weight loss. The list goes on about the different topics that you cover as well. Now, I'd love for you to share a bit of your story because we want to know what led you to want to create this blog that teaches how to cook dairy-free and gluten-free recipes for women so that they can gain control of their autoimmune disease and their hormones and their digestive systems. And also tell us a bit about your background around academia. I know that you have a degree in public health nutrition. I've actually never heard of that degree, so I'd like to know a little bit about how that helps you to in what you do with creating these recipes and with your podcast.
Sure, Ashley, and thank you again for having me. And I'm just really honored to be here and to be able to share information with your guests. With your audience. I'm a little nervous. It's so funny. Even after having my own podcast, I still get really nervous. I'm so used to being behind the screen typing and just writing, and then actually being on a podcast and speaking is pushes me out of my comfort zone. But I really love listening to podcasts, and I love your podcast. And I think it's such a special experience to hear someone's voice. And if you listen with headphones, if you're at the gym or in your car, and you're really getting a different experience hearing someone's voice. So I have learned so much from podcasts. That's what really inspired me to start my own podcast. But, you listed all of the health conditions that I've dealt with. And a lot of those, I think probably most of those came from living a really, really unhealthy life for the first almost 30 years of my life. Honestly, I live in California. I grew up in the Midwest and just really ate that standard American diet. I'm in my early 40s now, so my childhood was drinking like sugary drinks and foods out of cans and boxes. It was kind of when processed food really started to take off, maybe like in the early 80s, as I remember. But even before that, like um, like breastfeeding was not popular when I was a child, when I was born, just things like that. And then it really caught up to me. It My first signs that something was wrong was really when I hit puberty, and um, pretty immediately I had signs of PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, but that was not talked about that back then. So we're talking about, like in the late 80s. And so I didn't hear the term PCOS until maybe 10 years ago. So, but I mean, that was really the first sign that things weren't right. I didn't really have a lot of weight issues, but like when I went to the dentist, I would always have to have my cavities, have my, fillings put in. So just from eating bad food, not eating real food. And so I really never had a normal menstrual cycle. Then when I got to college and I was put on birth control, and I did not make the connection between starting oral contraception and then probably 6 months later, I had my first panic attack. And things just really started to go downhill from there. So, it's kind of hard to say what was the first thing that really impacted my health negatively. But I think, like for many of us, it's like a lot of things just adding up. I also had a very not stable childhood home. So it was filled with chaos and like moving a lot and financial instability. So I think that played into um, just not having like a really solid base. And then I think I had some thyroid disease start in my late 20s. So that was another big sign, like having really cold hands and feet, I had really thick hair most of my life and it got really thin. But again, this is maybe, so we're talking about over 15 years ago, and even things like thyroid disease and Hashimoto's, they weren't really talked about. And of course, we didn't have podcasts and blogs back then. So I didn't really know what was happening. And to be honest with you, I didn't even know the connection between what I was eating and how I was feeling. I mean, I just can't even believe that I never made that connection growing up.
Now,
Um,
did you go see a regular MD? Were you actively seeing doctors in your 20s?
Well, just really for like the birth control pill. And that was really like I didn't really go to the doctor that much. At one point, my OBGYN did, when I was complaining about fatigue, she felt my neck. And that was the first time a doctor had examined my thyroid. And she said, I just think maybe I felt something. So I think maybe you should see an endocrinologist. And I freaked out. I couldn't believe that. I didn't even know what a thyroid was, but just the fact that she said something could be wrong with it, it it was like it was the first time that I just really freaked out, even though I'd had um I didn't wasn't having a normal menstrual cycle, although when I got on the pill, of course, it's an artificial way to regulate your hormones. And so then, I guess I felt like a false sense that that was okay then. So then I did go see an endocrinologist, and he did an ultrasound, or he um, asked me to do an ultrasound. And when I was back in his office to get the results, he came in, he said, "Well, someday you're going to need thyroid hormone." And I was like, "What?" what are you talking about? And again, I still didn't really know what a thyroid did. And he said, yeah, you have, I don't even know if he used the word Hashimoto's, but he said, you have thyroid disease. Your thyroid is scarred. And so I'm trying to think, this was probably around the year, maybe 2005. And at that point, I had started learning about nutrition. As I mentioned, I didn't really know at that point what the thyroid did. Um, and I just kind of went on my way. He didn't really give me any ideas of what to do. He scared me, that's for sure. I thought, well, there's something wrong here. But he said, just come back in a year, we'll do another ultrasound and we'll continue to check your TSH, which is one of the blood levels that monitors how your thyroid is doing. I learned later that there's a full thyroid panel that can be checked, but I didn't learn that till much, much later. And even though I did have Hashimoto's disease, my thyroid at that point was still compensating. It was still producing thyroid hormone, although I think that was the cause of the fatigue. So I was like early stages of thyroid disease.
Why is it that we, like, when we don't relate food to health, like, what do you think happened in our upbringing, in society, in the media, in our education, both the public system, public school system, education at home, that our healthcare education, like the root word of doctor is docere, which means teacher. So our doctor's supposed to be our teacher around our health. What do you think happened that had millions of people like yourself brought up to not relate food to health?
I know, I've thought about this a lot. And, I thought about it more in the context of working through anger about my past. Just to be completely honest with you, I have the feeling that other people who've been through, basically almost like a living hell with your health, when you come to terms and you look back and you think about all the things that led to where you are today, there's a lot of anger that that I had to work through. And I would like to find the blame. I think really that the when I think about it, most of the doctors, they were really trying to do their best. They really were. It wasn't that they were hiding something from me. It's not like my parents, they certainly made their mistakes, but they didn't give me packaged fruit juice every day for 15 years because they wanted me to have PCOS later because of insulin resistance. I'm sure I begged them for the boxed or the canned, junk that I ate. So I just think that, and now talking about today's environment, I think it's a lot different. I think in many ways, the doctors of today could do a lot more to be educated because the information is out there, but there's just a lot of catching up to do. And you mentioned that I do have a degree in public health nutrition, and that's kind of like a mainstream degree where we use the PubMed online system. We're looking at evidence base. So when we go to talk about a certain subject, we're looking for studies that back it up. And if there's one thing I learned from studying statistics at a academic, a graduate level, in a graduate level environment, statistics you can really manipulate what statistics you use, what studies you do to back up your point. So, but going back to your question, in the past, I really think just the knowledge based to match up with maybe what the naturopathic doctors knew or um, the more alternative practitioners were observing. The scientific studies just didn't hadn't caught up, and they probably still haven't caught up. And so mainstream medicine is just still kind of continuing to look at the older evidence. And then of course we can't ignore things like, how do studies get funded in the first place? I mean, like, these double blind, placebo controlled, randomized trials are very, very expensive to run. And the companies, the medical based companies that have the kind of money to fund those millions of dollars, usually are having something to sell. So it's just kind of a complex, really big system that is still catching up.
Do you, off the top of your head, have any examples of studies where when you look at the surface, you're like, oh, that seems good. And then when you look deeper, you realize that it was manipulated?
And I think manipulated might be too extreme of a word. I think maybe in how it's interpreted or that kind of thing. I mean, I think a perfect example was when I was doing my graduate thesis for my master's degree in public health. I was very, very immersed in a vegan lifestyle and a plant based diet, as in my mind, I thought it was the answer that I had been looking for. So although I was uh, made effort not to have bias when I was doing my research, because my thesis was about disease and whether or not certain diseases were more prevalent in vegetarians versus non vegetarians. Although I was vegan, but there's very little research on vegan populations. So I was kind of limited to vegetarians. And then, so most of the studies that I dealt with came out of the Seventh day Adventist church population, which is a mostly vegetarian population, and through a university here in California that is like a Seventh day Adventist based university. It's very well respected and everything. But, even kind of looking back on that, um, those population studies, they're being performed by Seventh Day Adventist researchers, by a Seventh Day Adventist um, university. And so even looking back on that, I might interpret the outcome or the way I wrote my thesis, um, with a different kind of viewpoint based on my thinking.
I have heard of studies, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I've heard of studies um, where it talks about a certain amount of sugar, refined sugar is healthy, like, a tablespoon a day or 5 tablespoons a day, whatever it was that this study deemed healthy. And then you look deeper and you see that it was paid for by Nestle. Nestle being the owner of many chocolate bar companies, who also has a contract with the US government to put their food and their chocolate milk in every single, kitchen, every single cafeteria for all the public schools. So that all our little, children, the next generation, is being raised on high levels of refined foods and sugar and dairy. And now McDonald's and other fast food are in all of the, a lot of the public schools. And you look at the majority of what our children are eating, 7 meals a day, sometimes 14 meals a day if they go for breakfast. And a lot of children do also opt to have breakfast at their public school. And you realize that, between 7 and 14 meals a day are fast food, fried food, processed food filled with artificial chemicals, um, stimulants like MSG, high levels of salt and sugar, very little vitamins, very little fiber. And then you see the rise of ADD, ADHD. You see the rise of diabetes. And now, out of nowhere, autoimmune disease is on the rise. And it's sad and it's scary. But you're right, the information is out there. This is why we do, this is why you do your show and I do my show, so that we can bring this information to as many people as possible, because it really is up to the parents, up to the moms and the dads to learn everything we can learn, and the grandparents, right? And the aunts and uncles. It's up to us, it's up to the family members to learn what we can to help the children in our families and in our communities. We cannot leave their health up to the public system, because that's what went wrong in our childhood. If you look back, like you were describing the 80s, and if we just let our kids eat whatever's in this, in the cafeterias, and we just sort of trust whatever, the doctors are not educated in nutrition. They're not. And that's when I bring that up with people, they're always surprised. They don't believe me. They give me a look like I'm stupid and crazy and I should just like shut up because I just some conspiracy theorist. So I'm like, no, talk to doctors and ask them how much training in nutrition they get, and they get nothing. It's only a matter of an hours of training. And they really believe that they have all the training they need in nutrition because they're not taught that you can heal the body with food. So here you are, you've painted this picture of ill health. What what was the turning point for you? What was the big aha moment where you said enough is enough? I need to get my health back.
Well, I did have an aha moment, and I remember it very clearly. Although I had the moment, but then the actual learning process and the unlearning process, that's taken years, and it continues today. I mean, I'm learning, I'm hungry for nutrition knowledge and health knowledge that continues today. But I did have an aha moment when I realized things had to change. And that was when I saw the movie called Super Size Me. Do you remember that one?
Oh yes, absolutely. That was definitely an eye opener.
Okay, so that was the one, in case folks don't remember or didn't see it, it was the one where it's basically a documentary, and this man decides to eat McDonald's for 30 days and document his health, which ends up being a severe decline in health. But the aha moment for me actually wasn't that part of it, because I think I'd kind of understood what was happening there. But the aha moment was when they showed in the movie he had a healthy chef girlfriend in the movie, and this healthy chef, and it's funny because she is now one of my friends. So her name is Alex Jamison, and she made him right before he started the experiment, and then they showed at the end of the movie after, when he was trying to recover his health from this horrible experiment, she made him these foods that were, they were plant-based, they were just filled with vegetables, and she made that look so delicious. You know, my idea of health at that time before seeing this movie, and I thought about healthy was just a plain green salad with fat-free dressing and fat-free bacon bits, whatever that is. I can't even imagine how many chemicals are in would be in that meal. That was my idea of health. And I mean, of course, if we're talking about, like a plain salad, um, and maybe a stalk of broccoli. I mean, who wants to eat that? I know I didn't, and that's why I never ate vegetables. I truly never had, or never enjoyed, or never had more than, one bite of vegetable before this time. So it's really no wonder I ended up with so many health issues. But so watching her prepare the food beautifully, and now I understand that vegetables, for instance, the body can absorb the phytonutrients more when there's a healthy fat served with broccoli, or, any kind of vegetable almost. And I never saw healthy food, quote unquote, prepared in such an enticing way. And I literally went straight from the movie theater to the grocery store. It was like I'd never been in a grocery store before. Like the lights came on, and the vegetables, I was seeing them for the first time. I just remember this so clearly, and it was really exciting because it was a whole new world of possibilities had opened up for me.
I remember at the end of the movie how they showed didn't they show like a clip of McDonald's sitting on a desk for like a year?
Oh, yes, or a Twinkie, I think. Or something like that with like, if your food can sit in a package in an office for a year, right, or any length of time without going bad, you really have to think how many preservatives are in that food versus, you put a salad on a desk by a few hours, it's going to start to look wilted. So obviously it's meant to be consumed when it's fresh and vibrant, and that's when the phytonutrients are going to be at their highest levels.
Right. And if you take, I've seen the time lapse of you take a regular, like let's say you make a burger at home, like a homemade burger, homemade fries, homemade food with fresh ingredients. And then you take a McDonald's, or I could pick on McDonald's, but any fast food burger will pretty much do this. And you put it beside each other and do time lapse for a year. Obviously, within days, the one that you cooked is disgusting because it's starting to decompose. But McDonald's won't decompose. And a year later, it'll just petrify. It will not grow mold. And if a food can't support life, like mold, it can't support that life, could it support your life? Does it have
I think
anything in it to support you and your life?
I think that is such a good point. But I can really understand how that connection isn't made because I was not taught that. My parents did not. Were like baby boomer generation. They were not really taught about food. I mean, like even my grandmother, um, she did grow up on a farm, but she was kind of like, her actually when she passed, I was looking through her cookbooks and it was really um kind of scary. She had like jello, mold recipes, things like just really processed food. So now I guess I'm kind of like third, almost second or third generation of our society that's been fed processed foods and now starting to feel those consequences. And I agree, it's a real tragedy.
I think back to my grandmother who immigrated here from Poland, and she cooked homemade meals from scratch. And versus the same generation that was, from America or from Canada, was really into like the new thing was the TV dinners and the canned foods and the convenience foods and the frozen foods were starting to really take off. If you think about look back at the 50s, and look back the history of food. Did you study that as part of your degree, that sort of the history of our food in the last 100 years? And they were trying to make it more convenient, because if there was a drought or a flood, there might be an entire pop section of the population that would be cut off from food if we're constantly relying on fresh food. And so they were thinking of ways to make it some food more food last on the shelf longer, right?
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, we did study, uh, like kind of the development of like the processed food or the agriculture industry. And I do remember something in particular that I believe it was after World War I when the men in the US, this was the research that I remember, it was US based, and they they saw that the men coming out of the I think it was maybe the Midwest or the South, that they were poorly nourished, and that was the start of the USDA, I believe, which is the United States Department of Agriculture, and that was when the U.S. government decided to start fortifying foods. So that's how most of the flour and the cereals, the processed foods in the US now have all these all this fortification. So, like the folic acid, things like that. That's when they first started to get involved with, our population and nutrition, because when I guess they had to bring together men to fight this war, they found they just weren't fit to be prepared for war. And it's kind of ironic now, because I think after these decades of fortifying foods, and as you mentioned, there's now it's processed foods and fast foods. Now, I think our population is equally unfit, but now, with other kinds of diseases, obesity, and as you mentioned, the rise of autoimmune disease. And so something has to change. I mean, I do think that education, I think feeling inspiration, like that inspired moment when I left the movie theater, whatever it takes to get someone to feel that excitement about real food, I think that's the moment that things can change. And I really think it's important for women, or who is the main kind of caretaker of a family, whether it's a woman or a man. It's not gender specific. If it happens to be the woman, then that is a big responsibility. And inspiring that person who's then going to feed the children, feed herself. I mean, I'm just particularly passionate about women, and women having the resources that we need, because we do usually end up bearing the responsibility of feeding other people. And like for me, I show my love for my family, and for other people. Ashley, I wish that we were speaking in person. I would have brought you some kind of a healthy treat or something to break the ice and make us feel connected. But I like to express that with food, and I think a lot of other people like to do that too. But then when it can be nourishing foods, and um, like foods that are helping, then it really, boy, is that an expression of love.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to discredit the men out there, the dads, because like my husband is plays such an active role, and he is just as much of a parent as I am. But um I still think, like you said, women are more likely to be in the kitchen. And but please, men, prove me wrong. Get in the kitchen. Start cooking whole meals from scratch for your kids, for your wife, for all of your family. Um, you don't have to follow any one diet dogma. You don't have to be vegan. You don't have to be paleo. But I urge you to eat a whole food, meaning there's broccoli, eat it. And there's, collard greens, eat it. Like just get into the part of the grocery store where there are lots of leafy greens and bright colors of different vegetables and fruits, and incorporate that. So there you were, you had depression, panic attacks, IBS, eating disorders. Now, you had thyroid cancer, you had developed thyroid cancer, and you had all these issues. um, what what was the big turning point in your health? You obviously, it sounds like you'd started getting into vegetables before you developed full-blown thyroid cancer. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure, and thanks for asking. So, yeah, so as I mentioned, so I had this big aha moment, and then it really just became, probably, I guess I'm in my second decade now of unlearning and relearning how to take care of my health, how to cook, things like that. So, as part of my journey, I did get really deeply involved with a vegan diet and a vegan lifestyle. And I thought that that was the answer that I was looking for. Looking back on it, it was too far on the one side of the spectrum for me, for what ultimately I was able to find sustainable for me. And I think part of that is, like, I didn't really digest beans very well. And so I relied on soy for my protein. And this was going quite a few years back, and there really wasn't a lot of the information about kind of the difference between processed soy and unprocessed soy. So I would like tofu, for example, is an example of kind of a semi-processed soy, and it's unfermented. So like tempeh, which is a fermented soy product, might be considered more healthful than processed soy, like soy milk, things like that. So I relied very, very heavily on soy products, and actually, because I think I was not eating enough protein, I would just be really hungry, so I'd eat um, more sugar, things like that. So during that time of being really into a vegan diet, I did go for one of my annual checkup appointments with my endocrinologist. He said, come back every year. So I came back every year. I did the ultrasound, and then that one visit, it was 2012. It was just like I thought it would be like any other appointment where I went in. He said, "Oh yeah, nothing's changed. I'll see you next year." On this day, he said, "Well, we're seeing something different on your ultrasound. We see a spot we didn't see last year, and I think we should do a biopsy." And um, it was one of the worst moments of my life. Obviously, that wasn't a diagnosis, but I just had this horrible feeling. I got really weak. I had to lay down. I almost passed out. I was so nervous about it. So I did go for a biopsy a few days later, and not to scare anybody, if this is something that you have to face or something that you have to do. Most thyroid biopsies turn out to be negative. What they do is they use a very thin needle and puncture or take a sample from your thyroid gland, which is in your neck. It really doesn't hurt. I thought it would. They take about 8 samples, I think, and then look at those under the microscope. And in most cases, it's a negative result, meaning not cancer. In my case, the doctor called probably about 5 days after I had the biopsy, and he said, "Carrie, we found cancer, and you're going to need to have surgery probably in about 6 weeks." And I was just devastated. I mean, complete, absolute devastation. I was in my late 30s, so I'm 43 now, so this was about 5.5 years ago. Um, I thought that I had been doing everything right. I'd been eating a vegan diet. I thought I was doing everything right, and it turns out I could have had the beginnings of cancer way back in the 80s, when I was eating all that processed food. So it'll be impossible to ever know what made my cancer cells be there and grow. And then the standard procedure for when thyroid cancers are found is to remove the whole thyroid. Because not that long ago, they would maybe remove like half of the thyroid, and then the thyroid gland could still function, but then the research found that the cancer would still continue to grow. And so then patients were having to have a second surgery, and it's not a easy surgery. I mean, it's, real surgery in your neck. So it's quite a big deal. So that is what I had done. I had a full thyroidectomy. Um, I have been cancer free since then. I go back every 6 months, or it just depends. I do blood work. We monitor my neck for any other growths. But that was, if there was any kind of a point where I was really faced with my own mortality, that was certainly it. And it was just um, a complete shock to me.
Have you ever heard of meta medicine?
Uh,
Dr.
n-
Hammer's work?
no.
So back in 2005, I studied Dr. Hammer's work. He was a doctor in Europe who had discovered the direct link between emotional trauma and disease. And he could actually prove it by doing brain scans. Like they would normally do a brain scan but use contrast dye, and in his case he would not use contrast dye. And when he did a brain scan, you could see centrifugal rings of edema on a specific part of the brain that relayed to the organ. And he even suggested that almost all of our headaches are caused by this, caused by healing crisis that we go through when we have to deal with an emotional trauma. And when I say trauma, I don't mean something really obvious, that because like obvious things we sort of work out, but emotional conflicts that we can't work out, that we can't so maybe a conflict with a brother or a father. In the thyroid case, there's two separate ones. A thyroid gland is inability to get something in or out. So can't get something I want. I can't get rid of this as quickly as I'd like. That kind of inner conflict. And then thyroid gland, the ducts of the thyroid gland, if there's the diseases in the ducts of the thyroid gland, then it is a conflict of feeling powerless, helplessness, fear of losing control, wanting to be in control, vulnerability, a belief that I'm unfit, incapable, ineffectual, helpless, too passive, impotent, weak, and in what I can do. So those are the two conflicts that he discovered was associated around thyroid. All breast cancer, for example, depending on which breast it is, whether left or right, and depends on whether the woman is a dominant left or dominant right hand, relays directly to a past conflict with either a male figure that is like an older male figure, like a brother or father, or of equal, like a husband or son. Well, he did over 30,000 case studies. And it's just amazing how this one aspect of this one look into the direct mind body connection. Um, he has a mountain of evidence to suggest that we could use this to further help treat people and help people understand that there's more to physical health than just a physical body, that there's a huge emotional and mental component to health. He was actually thrown in a jail in France, and they said they would not release him until he signed a document stating that he was crazy and all his findings were crazy. So his findings were so powerful that it threatened enough people that they tried to control him. But everyone I've worked with, I've been able to clearly see a link between all the things that he discovered and illness. So, not that it's the only thing, and not that it's the end all be all, but to have people go, okay, here's my health issue. Let's look into what possible emotional conflicts could have contributed, because like you said, you could have been developing that issue for ever since your childhood, right? It could have been all the chemicals you've ate. In Dr. Hammer's work, he said that cancer or illness doesn't just have to be cancer, but that illness will arise between now and 4 years ago. So the conflict could be traced back up to 4 years. He didn't see conflicts anywhere kind of beyond 4 years. So it would help someone to kind of determine what was it that was the issue. But then you talk to other holistic doctors, and they see that they can detect cancer. Like now in Greece, there is I don't know if you know about it, but there's a lab in Greece that you can send your blood to, and they can detect cancer even before it's become a tumor. And what's so good about that is that what they do is they actually isolate the stem cells of cancer, uh, of your stem cells of your cancer in your body, and then they put it into a bunch of petri dishes, and then they attack it with over 270 different types of treatments. So radiation, chemotherapy, vitamin C, herbs and mushrooms and everything, you name it. And then they come back and give you a report, like what killed it fastest, what killed it the most, and then then that person could decide whether they're, oh look, vitamin C therapy really kills my cancer, or you know this type of mushroom really kills my cancer, or vitamin C didn't do anything. Okay, maybe I shouldn't spend thousands of dollars on that, because I have a friend who's been battling cancer, and she's spent tens of thousands of dollars, and it's just up in the air whether is that effective for this cancer, or are you just doing it because it's been effective for other people? And so there's things out there far beyond what the MDs are trained in. And that's why I'm sure people are listening to this show, because we have to advocate for ourselves, and we have to take our health into our own hands. In it, we have to hire our doctors as though they're part of our team to inform and educate us, but by no means are they the only expert, and they by no means do they have all of the information. So this was obviously highly traumatic for you to have gone through, and like you said, you felt like your life was threatened. But sometimes when we're up against the wall, it's what motivates us the most and gives us the most clarity, because now you've dedicated your life to helping others to gain their health back naturally. So what what was it? How did you navigate through all these diets to discover that gluten-free and dairy-free was so incredibly healthy for you?
Right. And I think just kind of going on what you said as well, like we don't want to scare people and say like if you've had a trauma then you're going to get a cancer. But I think feeling like there it is such a mind body experience, and I mean I knew that I had trauma but I didn't deal with it. And then when I did have this diagnosis, um I was really forced to deal with my you know my stuff, shall we say.
Hmm.
Because when you're just completely broken and hopeless, and you just I know that there are people listening who are feeling that, and I have so much empathy. But it can be that point where the healing begins. I think that's what it ended up being for me. It didn't feel good at the time, but I ended up doing the deepest emotional work I had ever done. Out of just sheer desperation because of how scared I was, really. But then I've been stronger for it since then. It's not to say that I'll never have challenges. Who knows what lies ahead? But I have the skills now, the emotional skills. I'm much better at dealing with challenges and like panic attacks when just like one little thing goes wrong, because we want to have control, but the reality of life is that we don't have control. So what we do have control over is like how we react to things and our own individual feelings. I have no control over um, people in my life who I had conflict with. I can't control them anymore. So I've learned, well, I can control, um, how often I see that person or interact with that person, or how open I am with that person, so I'm not too vulnerable and get hurt, or things like that. But um, so ultimately, I did have to kind of start from square one with my diet, since I had a PCOS in the past, and I'm still like once you have PCOS, like your hormones can get off. At least that's how it's been for me. And so it's always kind of like there's a fine balance. And I think with many women, like our hormones just depending on our own individual makeup. Different stressors and things can get our hormones in balance. From my research and from my own experience, I find that eating dairy free and eating gluten free, which is less inflammatory for me, and then like with no dairy, I'm not having the exposure to any of the estrogen that might be in the milk of the animal, things like that. Um, I find that so dairy free and gluten free really keeps my hormones in balance, so I don't have the symptoms of PCOS. I've done food sensitivity testing, which I think can be really, really helpful if people are wondering, well, do I really need to go gluten free? Because like a standard test for celiac disease maybe isn't going to show that you have celiac disease, but maybe you have a gluten sensitivity. And so a blood sensitivity test, which measures like your immune system reaction, but not like where you're going to go into anaphylactic shock. So not like a allergy, but a sensitivity. That can be helpful as well as an elimination diet. So just cutting out gluten or dairy or soy or nuts or whatever you're concerned you might have a sensitivity to, taking one of those foods out of your diet for a few weeks, even 10 days, might even be enough to be able to tell. Like if you're eating dairy and you take it out even within a few days, you might be able to notice, well, am I having as much postnasal drip at night? Am I having, like kind of like mucus coughing in the morning? That can be a, like those kinds of questions can be helpful if to identify if you have a dairy sensitivity. So going through this really traumatic experience, as I mentioned, it really kind of um, I went back to square one. So I realized, okay, so just kind of like recovering from thyroid disease and having to take thyroid replacement hormone can be a challenge. Like my energy, it took a long time to like find the right dosage, and so I was feeling a lot of fatigue, and then I found I really started craving like eggs and animal protein. So I added those back into my diet. So I had to really kind of let go of like a vegan diet, as in my mind, thinking that was the ultimate healthy diet. So then I kind of swung in the other direction. I went to more of a paleo type diet, which is pretty close to where I am now. A paleo diet, kind of the traditional paleo diet, excludes um, like white potatoes, which I eat now, and I actually do really well with white potatoes. So, and I do well with like white rice, and so that's in some paleo circles isn't considered like a real paleo food. So that's why I don't call myself like a paleo person really strictly. That so eventually I kind of came up with a, I didn't invent the word clean eating, but I took it on as thinking, well, it's flexible enough that it can be adapted to different individual needs as well as my changing needs. Ashley, we kind of had chatted before we started recording about how people's needs can really vary throughout a lifetime. And I think since I really kind of specialize so much with women, it's kind of interesting even just to observe how our needs can change even week to week. Like if we look at like a menstrual cycle and how even like if we look at cravings for more starch over certain times of the cycle, or maybe for more iron rich foods, certain types. So that's a perfect example of how an individual's needs can change with time, or over a lifetime, especially.
What you describe reminds me of Dr. Mark Hyman. I had him on the show. Definitely recommend checking out that episode. He talks about the flexitarian or the pegan, he calls it pegan diet, where it's like being a paleo vegan. It's like he still has meat, but the amount of meat is so much less than the standard American, and his quality of meat is very high, like grass fed. I imagine there's people who aren't living in America or Canada, look at us like we're crazy. My chiropractor just got back from Ireland, and he said he wants to move to Ireland, and he said everything there is grass fed. He says all the chickens, the sheep, the cows, everything just set out to pasture. And he's talking about the little towns. I'm sure in the big city you can get more commercially grown meat, but all the food that he ate while he was there was organic, non-GMO, grass-fed. He was traveling through Ireland, and I just imagine there's so many, no, hopefully so many countries still left that eat like that. And this is more like what Dr. Mark Hyman talks about, where the quality of your food matters. It really matters. And so if you're going to eat meat, it should be small amounts, like maybe 10% of your calories come from. In fact, that there have been studies that show that if you reduce your meat consumption to 10% of your calories to come from meat, then and animal products, then you reduce all cause mortality and actually will improve your longevity. There've just been lots of meta analysis and metadata to prove that. And so I like that you're teaching people how to cook more whole foods. You're teaching women how to eat in a diet that's dairy free and gluten free, because those foods are typically, when we look at someone especially who has an autoimmune condition, we can trace back and we can see that they have food sensitivities they might not be aware of. And gluten, and gluten grains, doesn't just have to be gluten, but that there's other proteins in gluten grains that we can also have an allergy towards. And it's very common. It's very common to have an allergy. 51% of the population is dairy intolerant. Whether 51% of the population knows it is another thing. But there's certain populations like Asian and African American who are between 70 and 100% totally unable to process dairy. And when they do, it disrupts their health, and they may not associate, they may just drink the milk or eat the cheese and then suffer the consequences, not realizing that it's not just short-term consequences, but it is long-term health consequences as well. That anytime we consume a food that our body is having a reaction to, it's more than just the gas or the bloating or the diarrhea or the constipation or whatever, the temporary feeling is. It's also completely messing with our immune system. I like to imagine the immune system is like our army, and our body is at war. Our entire life our body is at war against cancer and pathogens. And so you are the general of this giant army that is going out to do two things. There's an offense and a defense of our immune system. The offense, going out and actually fighting and killing the cancer, or fighting and killing the bacteria and the viruses and the fungus and the parasites and everything that our body needs to keep out. And then the defense is the part of the immune system that goes in and cleans up the area, cleans up the unhealthy tissue and the what's left behind, so the body can heal. And anytime we put McDonald's, you know, fried food, chemicals, or even seemingly healthy foods that we're allergic to, like eggs, dairy, gluten, even strawberries or bananas, you could have an allergy to. You don't know. That's why I really believe in allergy testing, to see, just to get a baseline, see what my body is reacting to right now. Because anytime we do eat a food we're allergic to, it compromises. Sort of like imagining you can see your whole army, and then you like bomb your own military. And we're causing suffering of on our own military, and then our military is unable to handle the diseases that it's fighting. It's unable to clear out the cancer when it's still just a little tiny tumor, or just starting, or it's unable to handle any virus or bacteria that comes our way, and then we end up catching every cold that comes our way because we're busy eating foods that suppress the immune system. When our immune system, what we want to do is design our life to build a strong and healthy army to help us always stave off disease. And so, what you're teaching people to do, or women, um, you're teaching people to build up this wonderful army inside their body so the body can fight off disease. And that's the also the misconception that some people have with autoimmune. They think that they have to suppress their immune system. And this is the rub. It's you want a healthy immune system. Right now it's having an unhealthy response to inflammation and damage when you have an autoimmune reaction. And MDs will give you drugs to suppress your immune system, but that will leave you open to, and I've had several doctors on the show describe this, that most people, when they're put on these immune suppressant drugs, will develop cancer. It's one of the side effects because, again, we're suppressing the army that fights the cancer. And so the best thing we can do is look to take away the foods that are confusing our army, right? Confusing our inner military, our immune system. And that's why so many people who, when they have autoimmune condition and they remove gluten and dairy and all the other things that they're allergic to, that they actually see an improvement. Maybe not an 100% improvement in their autoimmune, but they see an improvement simply from diet. Tell us a bit about your experience around autoimmune. What, what do you have? What kind of diet changes did you like? What kind of changes did you do, and what did you see, that affected it?
So when I was going through my thyroid disease, I had the Hashimoto's thyroid disease, which is an autoimmune disease, but I didn't take it seriously. And then when I had my thyroid removed, um, it was a few more years until I started seeing a functional medicine physician. And this physician has been monitoring my autoimmune thyroid disease, which is so ironic. I told him, how can I have autoimmune thyroid disease? I don't have a thyroid. But because I had had Hashimoto's disease for a good 10, 15 years before I developed cancer in my thyroid, my body had been producing antibodies that whole time. So even when my thyroid was completely removed, it still was producing um, these antibodies. And so I've been gluten and dairy free for, gosh, probably 7 or 8 years now. And that has made a huge difference. I'm seeing my antibody levels go down. It can just take a really, really long time. I think there can be a big jump, a big improvement if someone has been recently diagnosed with autoimmune disease. And I think there are a few measures now. It's not just autoimmune thyroid disease. There could be autoimmune, like autoimmune antibodies that can develop in other organs that can be measured, like for instance, for type 1 diabetes, that would be the pancreas developing antibodies that could be measured. And I think even for, let's see, so thyroid, pancreas, I'm not remembering what other immune autoimmune measures could be, like, say, for the joints, like rheumatoid arthritis. So, now these are more probably I mean, I think like a regular quote unquote doctor in the US will order these kinds of tests if maybe if you ask them or if you suspect you might have autoimmune disease, you can really kind of push your doctor. But then unfortunately, most doctors don't like their response, like, my quote unquote regular doctor told me that there was nothing that I could do to address my autoimmune thyroid disease. It wasn't until I started seeing a functional medicine practitioner where then he was able to like order the food sensitivity test. So I could really start to dig deep into my own individual biology. And this is like a really big point with me is I want people to really, really like take that control. Like, one doctor saying, this is fine, or, you have this, but there's nothing you can do. Come see me in a year. Well, that's one person's opinion. Now we have so many more resources where we can look for answers, and it can be overwhelming. So I think working with somebody, somebody who's qualified, who kind of has like that functional medicine perspective, we're trying to look at the root cause. That can really be life changing, and it can take away that overwhelm. And there are even amazing health coaches who they're not ordering lab tests but they're kind of acting as like a really informed friend or a really qualified therapist who can really help. Because even like an elimination diet, or like say you do a food sensitivity diet and you find out you can't eat eggs anymore, and then you read about a paleo diet and everybody's eating eggs for breakfast and you feel really overwhelmed. So I really encourage people to try to, not only find out what your individual needs are, but then find somebody to help you.
Do you work with people?
Well, so I do. I have, I mean, like even just being, even having access to podcasts, like yours, Ashley. I mean, you're interviewing like Mark Hyman. I mean, he is one of the fathers of functional medicine. He created, as I understand, the functional medicine department at the Cleveland Clinic. I mean, this is like world class. So, listening to his interview or reading his books, this is like up to date, life changing information.
Mm-hmm.
So, listening to podcasts, reading books, but like if you're a busy person, which most people are, and most people aren't like you and me, who are kind of like, this is what we could probably listen to podcasts and talk to people all day long. But other people, as strange as it sounds, they have like lives that don't revolve around food and health information. And
What?
so, I know. Um, but I can see how people can become overwhelmed, and it's really helpful to have somebody to be able to email and say, like, what? Can you help me figure out what to eat for breakfast if I can't eat eggs? But yes, I do work with a functional medicine physician. When I was like coming out of my vegan diet, I was really confused, and I felt like I had some eating disorder tendencies come back, especially after recovering from cancer. Like I felt like if I even eat one bite of sugar, it's gonna grow back
Mm-hmm.
whatever any remaining cancer cells. So I kind of got in like a really restrictive mindset. And I
Mm-hmm.
had to work with like an eating disorder specialist for her. She really like helped me reconnect with food and not have a fear around food. Like at my worst, I would go to a vegan restaurant because those are the only restaurants I would go with to friends, and I would still bring my own food. Because I thought, well, like, so I could still have the social experience, and like my husband, because he was vegan with me, he could eat, but I would still, and I'm talking about like, that's not really healthy, or I wouldn't even go out with people because I was just so scared of eating food that somebody else made, or, a restaurant may have used some sugar or some canola oil. And that is not, I mean, that is over restrictive, really.
I can see that, but I can also see where you're coming from. If you're battling cancer, everything you put in your mouth really counts. And then on the other hand, stress counts, right? So
Mhm.
because I've been watching my friend, using food as medicine, and she realizes that, if you are in stress mode, it is just as unhealthy as if you ate a cheeseburger. And so you have to like you can't stress out about food, but you also have to be hyper vigilant to make sure you're nourishing your body with the right food. So
Sure.
where do you find that balance between not, because if you're battling cancer, for example, or an autoimmune condition, being in stress mode can really set you back. It really can. We watched her, she every month she was getting her blood taken, and to see where her there's these two markers in the cancer markers to determine whether the tumor's growing or the tumor's dying. And every month she, because she was just using natural medicine, and then she decided to start a business to help fund her, you know, cancer, all natural cancer treatment. And of course, starting a business is incredible. She started a home-based business, and it was incredibly stressful that month. And but I mean, not like she was still getting sleep at night, but it's stressful, right? And her cancer markers went through the roof. 1 month later, she got her blood work, and they said, "What the heck happened to you in May?" Actually, this was like May 2 years ago. "What the heck happened to you in May?" And she goes, "Oh, well, I started a business." They're like, "Yeah, that would do it." And so basically, tumor started growing like crazy and stopped dying off, and she just really lost a lot of ground just from the stress, from that stress, right? So if you're stressing all the time about not being able to eat or go out or what to eat, that level of stress can really set you back. But at the same time, eating just anything you want at any restaurant ever also can set you back. So you've got to find that balance, right? How did you achieve that balance?
Well, that's exactly it. And it's a very fine line and it's very individual. I think and I, even now, so I'm 5 years out from my cancer treatment. It's not something that I'm thinking about every single minute of every single day now, like I was. It's just a very fine line, but even now I'm cautious because I still have like a gluten sensitivity. I have a dairy sensitivity. I do not like eating meat that I is not grass fed and is not organic. Um, I really really have a strong preference not to do that. So it is a learning experience. And when I'm traveling, that's probably the hardest um, part. I mean, the food can be the most enjoyable part of traveling, but for me, it can also be the most challenging and the most stressful. So it's really just kind of like day to day, and you mentioned stress. That is a huge component of my health and what I see with other people as well. And that is a daily practice. So for me, that involves journaling. Um, I mentioned that I had to learn to deal with a lot of like anger over my like the way I was raised and like all that chaos and bad food. And um, I had a really difficult childhood. Like my parents had mental illness and um, um, addictions, things like that. And so there's like a lot of emotions. Like I didn't really deal with my emotions prior to having cancer, and then it was like if you get a cancer diagnosis, anybody who's been there um, just knows that feeling, and you can't hide from that. So that is something that continues every day. I think yoga can be amazing, although when you're recovering from cancer, it's a really difficult time. For instance, I was in a yoga class maybe I think it was even a few months after I'd had my surgery, and the yoga instructor said something about how fate, like how the world everything happens for a reason. And I was so upset because I took it really personally. You mean I was meant to have cancer? I didn't say that, but in my head I was
Hmm.
thinking like had been my fault or something. So um for people who have a lot of feelings and um but you didn't really learn how to feel your feelings when you were a child, like you didn't learn how to cry and talk about how you were upset and learn that if you cry, then it feels good. It can feel good to cry, and it can make you feel better. And it's okay to cry, and it's okay to get angry. Um, there was a lot of rage in my household growing up, and so when I saw anger or I felt anger, I associated it with like fear, that fear that was terrifying. So I had to learn to feel my own anger and realize that it's a normal emotion. It's actually healthy to feel anger, and it's healthy to express it. Rage at like a child, or of course, rage at somebody for no reason is not appropriate. But anger in response to something that upsets you and then addressing it is a healthy situation, and it's really a very healing thing to learn to feel your emotions. And especially if you're dealing with a health issue, even autoimmunity, as you talked about, there are probably emotional roots to almost every health condition out there. And tapping into those feelings and like those traumas, I think if they're really, really significant, like abuse, then it's really important to work with a professional. Like I worked with an eating disorders specialist. She was very aware of like words that she used with me and like suggestions. So if you're dealing with a really big trauma, then I think finding somebody who has that specialty is important. So there's a lot that comes around healing and recovering from any kind of disease, cancer or autoimmunity, even being overweight. There can be a lot of emotional components um, to how like food can be such a great comfort. It can be the way that a child who's in an unstable environment survives. I
Mm-hmm.
know, like, food for that, for me, like sugar was that for me. And if somebody had told me, when I was like 10 years old, like, you can never have sugar again, like, my whole world would have collapsed because that was the only thing that was getting me through the day. Um, so like these are real things that people deal with, and like it's not to feel ashamed about, but I think asking for help can from somebody who like knows how to give you skills and can help you build your skills, I think it can just be like it can be that first step. Like it's so easy. I create recipes and I'm putting out new recipes and like I'm putting them on Instagram, like, doesn't this look amazing? But like, what if somebody doesn't really care about their body or wants to die? Like, I mean, not like that's a real thing that people are going through, or like a
Mm.
fear of pain. Like, I know a big thing in the news is about like opioid addiction, and I feel so much empathy for people who read those headlines and they're like, yeah, like I feel so guilty about taking a painkiller every day, but that fear of not taking a painkiller, I have empathy for what so many people are going through. So, like, if it's a opioid or it's a bag of candy or it's, too much alcohol or whatever it is, if you are ready to start to dig down, like you don't have to go cold turkey. But there is like a better way, and it can be really, really freeing when you aren't dependent on those kinds of things. And I don't know that I'll ever get to the point where I'm like, oh, yeah, like cancer I'm grateful because it helped me, like become the person I am today. Like, oh my gosh, if I had the choice, I would not have gone through that. But it was the point that made me really start to heal. I mean, it really was. And it's been just a little bit day by day, certain days, like if I listen to one of your podcasts, Ashley, that are just like so dense and inspiring, um, and somebody's saying, like I'm talking to you right now saying like it's okay and you can do this, and you can either take a big giant step or you can take a little tiny baby step. That is up to you. But there is a better way and you can feel better. It's going to be like a lot of bad days, but ultimately, like that freedom is amazing.
Mm. I'm looking at your recipes on your website, which are like making me really hungry. So we're gonna have to talk about that. Um, what kind of emotional work did you do? Because I think you've definitely piqued some interest in the listeners about doing emotional work, but that's sort of like opening a can of worms. Did you read books? Did you see a therapist? Like, how did you process? How did you even learn how to process your emotions and get in touch with your anger?
Yeah, so I worked with a telegroup. Actually, the program came out of the University of Southern California. Sorry, the University of San Francisco. It's USF. It was a program called Emotional Brain Training. And there are a few iterations, but it really involves like the idea of neuroscience, and that you have like these survival wires that get tripped in your head. And these wires are set like before the age of 3. So, like, I'm a bad person. And anyways, it was. I can send you the name of the book, Ashley, that first piqued my interest. And it was funny because the woman who created this program was a dietitian. Now she's a PhD, but she did it to help her clients who had emotional eating issues. And then she realized that by tapping into your emotions, not only can you overcome like emotional eating, but you can overcome other kinds of addictions, or, like even smoking cessation or things like that. So I ended up working with a telegroup, and it's not as complicated as it sounds. It was like doing things like saying in a group or writing in a journal at the end of the day, like I feel angry that, and then saying what I'm feeling right then. I feel sad that, I feel guilty that, and I feel afraid that. Just like those 4 statements, um, I I never really wanted to tap into any of those emotions, right? Because those feel negative. But then if I tap into them, then maybe I can actually deal with what's bugging me and what's making me want to go eat a cookie. Um, and one of the posts on my blog that I is pretty popular is how to create a worry journal. And that in particular has been helpful because I have dealt with anxiety and panic. So, like some people might deal with rage, which could be like anger is the source of rage. For me, it was anxiety and panic, which fear was at the base of that. And I just never like really. I've always felt helpless as a child because of like all the chaos and um, my parents not being there for me, so I felt like really alone. So like for me in the evening, if I'm feeling anxiety, rather than like just try to cover it up and not feel it, I'll actually write down, okay, so like I feel worried. Like, so if, say, if I had done it last night, I feel worried about this interview that I'm doing with you right now. Like, I feel worried I'm going to say something stupid. So rather than maybe wake up in the middle of the night feeling anxious about it, then I wrote it down, and then I wrote the solution. What was the solution? Um, I'm just going to do the best I can. I mean, who can argue with that?
Plus, I can always edit it out, right?
Well, right?
It's not a live show, so anytime you say something stupid, just let me know and I'll just edit it out.
Okay.
So far, you haven't said anything stupid. I'm
Okay.
still waiting.
Okay. Thank you for that positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
But like for people who feel anxiety, like that can be an effective strategy is to create
Mm.
a worry journal. But so you're not only just writing what you're worried about, but you're
Hmm.
writing a solution. It kind of like takes the pressure off of your brain. So like, so
Yeah.
I'm like, say, like I'm going to take a blood test. I'm worried that, it might show like my cancer came back. Well, so I write the solution. Well, what's the solution? I'm going to take the test. I'm going to manage my stress, and I'm going to take it one day at a time. Like I can't stress about what's going to happen in the future. Um, I mean, that used to be my technique, but
It
then
wasn't serving you.
then I end up having a panic attack or I end up not sleeping. And so I think that's kind of an example of like just where I am with my emotional work and kind of
Mm.
what it took to get to that point.
Tim Ferriss teaches something really similar, like a fear journal, where you and at first I didn't agree with it, and then he explained. I'm like, okay, now I get it. Because my thing is, I do timeline therapy with people. I'm a master practitioner and trainer of timeline therapy, and timeline therapy helps you to get to the root cause of the gestalt. Gestalt meaning the chain. Our neurology stores all of our emotions like a connected chain. So you can light up in your neurology when by feeling sad, you can actually light up every memory in the past where sadness is still present. And so with timeline therapy, we go to the root cause and we resolve the root for your neurology, the root cause of sadness. And then that releases, because you've gained the resolution, it releases sadness from all the past memories where it's been stored. And in that particular style of neurolinguistic programming, which is understanding neuroscience, the more you reinforce an emotion, it's training the brain to have it. The more you reinforce something. So, like, going into like an anger management group where everyone talks about how angry they are. It's like practicing being angry, so the concern is like, well, if you keep just practicing your anger, is that really going to get rid of it, or is that reinforcing it neurologically? And but what I really like about what you just described, and what Tim Ferriss teaches is doing this journal, because what you have to do is see like, what is your greatest fear? So like, what's your fear? Like in your case, what's your anxiety or worry, which is the same thing. I'm worried about, XYZ. You write that down, and you have to write out, okay, well, what's the worst possible thing that could possibly happen? And then that's one column, and the next column is like, what's actually probably gonna happen? Like, what, like within, like, because we always blow things up way out of proportion. Sort of like, oh no, I'm in traffic, and because I'm in traffic, I'm gonna be late for work. Because I'm late for work, I'm gonna be fired. Because I'm fired, I'm not gonna be able to pay my mortgage. Because I can't pay my mortgage, I'm gonna be homeless. Because I'm homeless, I'm gonna die on the streets alone and starving. And we jump to that so quickly, then our heart rate goes through the roof and we're still in traffic, late to work. But our body is reacting as though we're actually, our life is being threatened, because we go to these extremes in our mind. And it is definitely part of our ancient survival mechanism that helped us avoid the bear, um, you know, for millions of years or however long we've been here, but is not serving us now in this modern age when stressors are everywhere. And what we got to do is we got to get really realistic. And so I love that technique of going, okay, well, what am I actually worried about? Well, that's highly unrealistic. Now, what's really going to happen? And then you write down what's actually going to happen. And so it's sort of look the contrast. What's that probably going to happen is, my boss is not going to be happy about it. And I say, listen, I'll make it up to you. I'll stay late. I couldn't, there was traffic I couldn't avoid. I promise I will leave earlier from home from now on, and I'll stay late tonight, and I'll, make it up to my boss. My boss won't fire me and everything will be fine. That's probably what's going to happen. Right. And then like that's part of you writing down the solution. But us recognizing that what we're actually reacting to, what's causing our anxiety, because anxiety is a fear of the future, of this imagined future that hasn't happened yet. And we are the creators of our anxiety. Anxiety doesn't happen to us. Anxiety is a creation of our focusing on what we don't want to have happen in the future. Because anxiety is a message from our body saying, hey, we're under threat. We're under siege. We need to take action to survive. Meanwhile, we're just sitting there in a very safe space, but the body is reacting to our thoughts because our body listens to all of our thoughts. And this is, again, this mind body connection. We really take for granted how much our body and our physical health is related to our mental and emotional state. That our body, that you could think about a car crash, and I can guarantee you your heart rate goes up, your adrenaline levels go up, your cortisol, all your stressors go up. And that then triggers blood to shunt away from the logic centers of your brain, shunt away from even your digestive core, stop all the enzymatic processes that have to do with health and healing, and turn on all the enzymatic processes that have to do with survival. And meanwhile, all you did was have a thought. And
I
so, yeah,
know.
we really, really like need to take some, you know, just as much time as we spend in the gym or spend in the kitchen or spend at the acupuncturist and the chiropractor. We need to spend on our emotional mental health.
I so agree with you. And it's not, it's different for everyone. But I think you're right. You know, if you're somebody who's dealing with something or you're like you're doing everything right, I get a lot of people asking me that. You know, I'm doing all this and I'm still seeing like the Hashimoto's autoimmune markers. Well, then I think that can be a sign to do that kind of work. And I think that timeline therapy that you mentioned sounds incredible. I think, you know, there's all kinds of like iterations of this emotional work, but really, probably any of it um, will be helpful for people who are really looking to find that healing.
Excellent. And I'll definitely make sure that we include that book that kind of got you started
Okay.
in the show notes of the podcast. Now, let's talk a bit about your blog because gorgeous pictures. Did you take these pictures yourself?
I did, but I'm coming up on my 9th year anniversary of blogging. So it's been truly a labor of love and a ton of practice. I used to take the worst food photos.
Well, these are gorgeous,
Thank you.
really beautiful. Um, Gosh, tell us about your blog. This is, I mean, just mind-blowingly gorgeous, delicious food that is really healthy. I want you to be my personal chef.
I want
Seriously.
to be your personal chef.
Tell us about your website. What should people know about it?
So I think we mentioned it's all gluten and dairy free. I have kind of like I like to use superfoods, but I like to make it simple. So, it's funny because I am all like we talked about, I'm kind of obsessive about nutrition and I do spend a lot of time in the kitchen, but I don't like to make complicated recipes. They have to be honestly like 3 to 5 ingredients is perfect for me. I maybe go a little crazy with my breakfast smoothies because smoothies are such a great vehicle for adding in like all little like powders and potions. So that's probably the exception. I make complicated smoothies, but if I post a recipe, then it's not going to be complicated. I'm sensitive to the issue that a lot of women or a lot of people are budget conscious. So I try to use, you know, seasonal ingredients, readily available ingredients. As I mentioned, not too many ingredients at one time. I try to be efficient in the kitchen. So I like the concept of meal prepping where you like prepare a lot of food on say Sunday so you have it through Wednesday. I'm not probably not disciplined enough to really put it into practice, but I think that can be a great technique. I like using appliances like a pressure cooker. That's probably like the newest thing that I'm doing that I'm having fun with. Although I just would say if you're new to that, it's not like a slow cooker. It's almost like the opposite. And I've had some um, disasters Like a smoothie disaster used to be my thing, but then you could always just add a little pineapple and it'd be okay. But a pressure cooker disaster usually ends up being like something either like undercooked or overcooked and not salvageable. So I would say use a recipe if you're going to use a pressure cooker just until you get the hang of it. It took me a while. I try to I try to do 1 to 2 new recipes a week. I have a recipe index. Everything's gluten and dairy free. A lot of it is vegan because I've been blogging for so long. I have quite a repertoire of vegan recipes, and I'm not like anti-vegan. I eat a lot of vegan food, but I do eat meat and eggs and animal products. I always try to link to um, like there are some services now to be able to access grass-fed meats easily. Like having I live in California, so I'm spoiled. We have a lot of local grass-fed meats available here, but like buying that type of meat frozen and having it shipped can actually be economical because it is frozen. And the same goes for, even buying like organic foods. I think organic frozen produce can be a way to save money. So that's just kind of like an overview of my blog. It's called cleaneatingkitchen.com. And I try not to be too regimented about like promoting one diet over the other, just with that kind of caveat that everything's gluten and dairy free.
I'm really impressed. Like I'm scrolling through your website. I'm not sure I've ever seen this many gluten-free, dairy-free recipes that are like whole foods based, that have lean heavily towards whole foods, that many of them are vegan, that, you know, also are minimal ingredients so it's easy to make. I'm scrolling through. I see enough that I could play with for months, which is really cool.
Oh, thank
So,
you,
yeah,
Ashley. That
absolutely.
means a lot to me. And as I said, like it's a challenge to make healthy food look delicious. And I joke because I used to make green smoothies and put them up on my blog, and they looked like baby poo. So that is like my biggest challenge is to make foods like a green smoothie, um, chia pudding, or now even like that I'm eating meat. That has been a whole new challenge to make. Yeah, just to make like real food look as delicious as it tastes. It's an art form, and it's something that I'm still learning and working on.
I love that your smoothies have such a variety of vegetables. I'm seeing here you have a vanilla smoothie with frozen cauliflower, and it looks really delicious. And you have a raspberry cream smoothie with frozen squash.
That's right. Yep, that was one of my um fun things I tried last season when the all the squash was available. And anybody who has a garden knows that you always end up with too much zucchini, right? You're like, please take my zucchini. But I like to steam things like that too before I freeze them. It's usually easier for my stomach to digest. Like I don't really do great with raw cauliflower or even raw zucchini. So I usually put that in the recommendations, how to, within the recipe, how to steam and freeze foods like that.
Awesome. Cool. Well, what's your favorite recipe?
Oh gosh, probably it probably would be a smoothie, and I actually even steam my greens before I make a smoothie. That's kind of a tip that I picked up over the years. It helps reduce the oxalates that are present in a lot of those really dark leafy greens, like especially spinach. And if that word doesn't resonate with you, it's okay. Like you can eat spinach raw, but if you're eating a lot of spinach, I like to steam it gently before I put it in a smoothie. Also, I am a super taster, which means I'm really sensitive to bitter flavors. And so I find steaming like collard greens, even kale, broccoli, cauliflower, gently steaming can help make them not taste so bitter. But my a favorite recipe that I make probably the most often would be using a few tablespoons of hemp seeds, 2 cups of water, quite a few handfuls of spinach that are gently steamed, a frozen banana, maybe like a half a cup of frozen strawberries and cocoa powder because I'm a chocoholic, and maybe a few other little potions, like maybe some protein powder, but then using a high speed blender, making it just really creamy. And that is like the perfect breakfast for me.
Delicious. I enjoy smoothies, well, definitely because of their convenience, and I love just how many vegetables you could pack into, like you could drink 30 ounces. It sounds like a lot, but you could sip on it for an hour, and you're getting so much dense nutrition and so much fiber. And you can also make them taste really good. I had a guy on my show way early on, um, and he's like a green. I think he calls himself like green smoothie guy or something. I can't remember his exact name at the very moment, but his name was Bradley, and he was like really overweight as a kid. He actually said he never had a glass of water until he was like 13. Like he just drank Coke. You know what I mean? Like his parents gave him a Coke instead of water his entire childhood. And so he was always like 200 pounds, even when he was like 13. And smoothies is how he got his life back. And now he's a model.
I think I remember that episode. And I mean, I feel kind of the same way. I did drink water, but I never had a green vegetable. Um, like before the age of like when I saw that movie that I talked about, the Super Size Me, like these were vegetables. And then I went to the grocery store. I'd seen them before, but I had never eaten them or even thought about buying them and doing something with them. So, even though I do try to eat really healthy, quote unquote, I don't actually love eating vegetables. So I find smoothies to be that just a great way to get the leafy greens. I'm sure you know this, Ashley, but not eating dairy. Um, people say, well, like, where do you get your calcium? But those dark leafy greens are an excellent source of calcium. And so I do try to have a smoothie almost every day.
Where does the cow
Um,
get its calcium?
from the grass.
Where does the cow get its protein?
Right.
Exactly.
So and then I do try to be aware that not everybody loves eating vegetables. And so yeah, so even my recipes I'll try to use like present ways to roast vegetables or somehow get them into a dish so it actually tastes good. I mean, because food should be delicious. Healthy food shouldn't be that horrible, pathetic salad that I described. Food should be delicious and nourishing, and it should be healing your body and really building your body up instead of breaking it down like so many of us have eaten that way. But there's a different way, and it can be just as delicious. It really can.
I want you to make an online course teaching people how to cook, like complete beginners, because I know so many women who don't know how to cook. They want their health back and they eat out almost all their meals because they don't know how to cook. And it's really scary for an adult who doesn't know how to navigate the kitchen, or every time they do, they just burn something and so they don't do it.
I know, and I'll think of some resources actually that I can send you to put in the show notes.
All right, sounds great. Well, I've challenged you though. I want you to come up with a cooking show or some kind of like cooking 101, some kind of video series to teach all the women out there who really want to reclaim their health but are afraid of the kitchen.
Okay, well, I've started with my podcast. I have a few episodes. Now it's of course it's not a video, but I have a podcast episode because my podcast is called Clean Eating for Women. For instance, I have one called How to Make Vegetables Taste Delicious. And I share all my little tips.
Nice. Excellent. Well, we'll have to check out that episode. Carrie, thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there anything that you'd like to share to wrap up today's interview? Any actionable steps you want to share with people or anything left unsaid?
Well, I appreciate all the time that you've spent with me, Ashley, and really letting me share my story and my tips. I feel like I kind of, we kind of really we really dug deep. I would say that the actionable steps that I think we covered, but just to wrap it up, I would say, figure out your best diet and um, do whatever you need to do to figure out what is right for you. um, I would say if you are dealing with the disease, to do your best to reframe it as like an invitation to connect deeper to your body. Um, and, like taking on your disease as a challenge, but finding the support you need so it's not like another traumatic experience, but it could be like that way of connecting deeper to yourself. And then while you're in this stage of healing, to really connect to your feelings. And like we talked about, like the anger and the fear, learning how to feel those feelings in a healthy way that can actually have your life be more of like a freeing experience, where you can really like share your special gifts. And because we want those gifts that you have, the world, there's no one else like you. So please do what you need to do so you can share your special gifts, because we're waiting to receive them.
Hello, True Health Seeker. I have a very exciting announcement. I have spent over a year, I've spent about 14 months collecting all of my information that I use with my clients for ending anxiety, and I created an online program. I'm very excited about it. We just launched it. And for you, for free, I have a webinar where I teach you 2 powerful mind tricks for removing anxiety, ending worry, and controlling fear so it stops controlling you and your life. In my free webinar, you will learn what causes anxiety and how to stop it, the science behind the mind-body connection, overcoming fear of public speaking, getting unstuck, ending that fear of things not working out, ending procrastination and overwhelm, and feeling excited, grounded, and calm instead of fear and worry. I have so much to teach you in my free webinar, and I'm really excited for you to come check it out. Go to freeyouranxiety.com/webinar. That's freeyouranxiety.com/webinar, or look in the show notes of today's podcast and you'll see the link there so you can jump into the webinar and learn all these wonderful, powerful tools that will end your anxiety and create excitement and happiness instead. Go to freeyouranxiety.com/webinar and sign up now, and I look forward to seeing you in the next live webinar. Do you feel like you're missing something? Are you searching for the right answers to solve your health issues? Do you feel like you should have more energy and mental clarity? With everything you're doing for your health, you may be missing one key component. Our body needs 90 essential nutrients every day to function optimally. Because of the farming practices over the last 100 years, most of our food has 60% fewer vitamins and minerals compared to just 50 years ago. So if you aren't eating 8 cups of a variety of fruits and vegetables each day, you may be missing some of your essential nutrients. These are the raw building blocks the body needs to create new healthy tissue, healthy hormones, balanced digestive system, strong muscles, bones and joints, and maintain an optimal functioning nervous system. Especially if you're experiencing more stress, or if you've gone through an illness like an infection, that takes more resources. So if you're not consuming more vitamin C and more of all the 16 vitamins and all the 60 minerals when you're going through more stress, either physical stress, emotional stress, mental stress, those stressors take more nutrients to kind of survive those bumps in the road in life. And over time, that whittles away, that kind of depletes our nutrient tanks, our stores in our body. Without these 90 essential nutrients, things start to break down. Now, you've experienced these breakdowns. Maybe you get migraines. Maybe you're exhausted. Maybe your hormones are out of balance, your digestion's out of balance, or you have some aches and pains. Maybe you've even been diagnosed with something. You have a series of symptoms, and if those symptoms all look like something, then we can diagnose it, right? That's what MDs can do. MDs will treat these breakdowns with drugs and mask your symptoms. But if your body has a nutrient deficiency, no amount of drugs will fix the problem. 7 years ago, I embarked on a journey to cure my diabetes, infertility, PCOS, high blood pressure, and chronic adrenal fatigue. I felt like I was a mess. Through my research, I found a company that made natural supplements to address these nutrient needs. They formulated their supplements to exceed all standards of quality. Their minerals are the most bioavailable and absorbed by the body that I have ever found. After getting on their protocols for healthy hormones and blood sugar, along with their dietary recommendations for better health, I reversed my type 2 diabetes, I reversed my infertility, I no longer had high blood pressure, my energy and vitality came back, and after 6 years of trying to get pregnant with my husband before we found these supplements, once we got on these supplements, we were able to conceive our wonderful healthy son, who's now 3 years old, and he is amazing, and we would have never had that had we not found this company. Speaking of our son, he's also taking these supplements for optimal health. His pediatrician thinks they're amazing. If you'd like to give these supplements a try and see for yourself if you're experiencing a nutrient deficiency, please go to takeyoursupplements.com. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Their health coaches are phenomenal. I personally know all of them. They're amazing people. And I just want you to know, as my listener, I feel like I need to protect my listeners. I would never promote anything that I didn't 100% believe in and I didn't feel was healthy or good for you. I feel like you're my tribe, and I'm sharing this information. In fact, for the last 2 years, the only reason why I've been doing this podcast is so that I can help as many people as possible gain their health back. And so the health coaches at takeyoursupplements.com, I really trust that they will make sure that you're well taken care of. They will work with you to help determine the best protocol for your nutrient needs and work within your budget. They will also help to implement a holistic protocol that includes supporting a healthy diet and lifestyle. Go to takeyoursupplements.com, fill out the form, and one of their health coaches will get back to you really shortly. And then you guys can schedule a time to talk on the phone, and they will work with you to help you dial in all your nutrient needs. I really look forward to hearing about your experience with them. Please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to me in our Facebook group. Go to Facebook, search Learn True Health, and join our group. Let me know what you think about the wonderful health coaches at takeyoursupplements.com. And by the way, when you go to takeyoursupplements.com and you get assigned to a health coach, they're your health coach. You're not going to keep getting a different person every time. You get one person, and they work with you and they hold your hand for months down the road. They're there for you to support you month after month while you're on your nutrient protocol, and they're helping you dial in your nutrient needs. They're really wonderful like that. So I know you'll enjoy your experience with them, and I'd love to hear about your experience with them. Please feel free to, you can email me as well, ashley@learntruehealth.com. I love hearing success stories. Like I said, I've been working with a supplement company for my own health for the last 7 years, and I've reversed so many issues. I love sharing this information because I think that many of you will be able to resolve your issues with nutrition, just like I've seen many people do. With that said, go to takeyoursupplements.com, fill out your information, and a health coach is very excited to start working with you and helping you get your health back.